Hello everyone and welcome to a really wild game from the second day of the FTX Road to Miami preliminaries. It is Wei Yi versus Wenjun. You guys know both of them, but for those of you who are maybe new to chess, Wei Yi is the third highest rated Chinese player behind Ding Liren and Wang Hao. We've seen many of his games. He's a really strong player and a very strong attacking player at that. And Wenjun, she's been holding the title of Women's World Champion since May 2018. Well, also a very strong player, but she is the only woman in the field. There are 16 players here in this tournament, and she's the only woman grandmaster. She's the fifth woman to ever cross the 2600 barrier regarding classical rating. Well, it's just a very enjoyable game. She's not the highest rated. Currently, highest rated is Ho Yifan, but Ho Yifan has been out of the chess world for quite a while now. We don't know if she will ever return. And I believe Alexandra Goryachkina is currently higher rated than Zhu Wenjun. She is, I believe, third highest rated in the world now. But okay, that being said, let's check out the game and enjoy some chess. So Wei Yi opens with c4. He goes for the English opening, and Zhu Wenjun goes for knight to f6. We have g3, e6, and now bishop to g2 and pawn to d5. We have knight to f3, and she goes after the grab. D captures on c4. The Neo-Catalan defense accepted. We have castles, and now knight b to d7. Queen to c2, now going after the c4 pawn, and she defends it. Knight to b6. We have a4, trying to chase away the knight, and she defends with pawn to a5. We have knight to a3, going after the pawn, and the bishop captures on a3. So this is all standard stuff, all been played before. You give up the bishop pair, but you have a nice pawn on c4. So rook captures on a3, we have castles, and now pawn to e4. And here, it seems that she prepared very well, as Wei Yi already had this position in 2017 against Ruslan Ponomaryov. He won that game in the Danja Super Grandmaster tournament in China. In that game, e5 was played. E5 was played by black, but here she plays bishop to d7. Still not a new move. There is a game where this move was employed, but it continued with knight to e5. However, here we have a pawn to d4, and it is now already, as of move 11, that we have a completely new game. So let's see how she continues. You could just continue with something like bishop to c6, continuing development, but she goes for c captures on d4. She captures en passant, and this is a rapid game, and of course the choice definitely makes sense. If you're a human, you want to get rid of your doubled pawn, and you want to destroy white's very strong center, so this is an automatic. C captures on d3, rook captures on d3, now lining up the rook with the queen, and now she even goes for knight captures on e4. And this is a very risky grab, but only if white plays this to absolute perfection. And here Wei Yi does not continue in the most aggressive way possible, which is very odd. Here rook captures on d7 is a move that you probably play in bullet. It's very interesting that he decided to go for something else, because you just give up the rook for two knights. For example, queen captures on e4, queen captures on a4, offering a queen trade, but you can now even capture on b7. And it's definitely the best choice for you. However, he wants to keep material on the board, he wants to complicate things, and he goes for the attack. Rook to d4, attacks the knight, she goes back, knight to f6, and now knight to e5, putting more pressure on the bishop, preparing rook to d1, and also preparing to shift the rook over to the king side to attack the black king. So knight f to d5, closing up the d file, and now rook h4, threatening checkmate on h7. She defends with f5, and now pawn to b3, just guarding the a4 pawn, and the bishop is now coming to this diagonal. We freed up the b2 square for the bishop. Queen to e7, she develops the queen, connects the rooks, and now we have rook to e1. Aligning the rook nicely with the queen, and now rook f to d8. You could also play rook 8 to d8, but she wants this rook to come to c8. So rook f to d8 and the bishop to b2, putting a lot of pressure on black's king side. We have bishop to e8. Now nicely controlling the knight from e8, and bishop to d4 now. We have rook 8 to c8, and now knight to d3. Guarding that c5 square, but also the knight can now be remaneuvered over to f4, and then putting pressure on that e6 pawn. So here bishop to c6, and now queen to e2. And here we have knight to f6, which is very interesting. You can see that Wei Yi is attacking this e6 pawn, and there's no good way to defend it, but you don't really have to defend it. Just to give you an example, if you play something like knight to d7, which is an odd move to play, white can never capture this pawn here, because if you capture it, for example, queen captures, rook captures, now you have this incredible knight to f8 move. You attack the rook, and once the rook moves, you attack the other rook. And now, after this rook moves, now you play knight to d back to e7, and what are you doing about the bishop and the knight here? You can't move the bishop because you lose the knight, so the best thing you can do is just to go after this knight, attack it twice, but still after the trade, for example, rook captures, bishop captures on e7, we have a capture fest here, captures, there's rook to d1 check, and white is just dead lost here because the light square bishop and the rook are completely winning here. Bishop f1, you can go bishop, you can even go rook to e8. Now you can't move the rook anywhere, you have to trade, so rook captures, bishop captures, you attack this rook, let's say rook captures on f5, or you don't have to capture, doesn't really matter, the bishop will always find a way. Bishop d7, now if you get to play bishop h3, it is game over, so you can defend the h3 square, but now bishop g4, and again, not enough squares, you're winning this bishop and it's game over. So just to give you an example of why the e6 pawn cannot be captured. So she goes for knight to f6 instead, and now you could capture on e6, but still it would blunder the game. Just to give you an example of what happens here, captures, and now knight to e4, you block this rook's defense of the bishop is now hanging, you can't move the bishop because the knight is hanging, and Wei Yi would have to resign here. But the reason this move was better than this move is because of what Wei Yi plays. He plays bishop captures on c6, he doubles those pawns, b captures, and now just knight to e5, going after the c6 pawn, and it's now a much better position than she could have if she went for that idea. But okay, queen to e8, defending the pawn here, and bishop back to c3, getting the bishop out of harm's way. We have rook to d5, and now pawn to f3. It's a rapid game, so of course we cannot, they cannot explore all the options, but we can as we are analyzing it, from the comfort of our home. Rook c to d8, doubling on the d file, and now pawn to g4. He continues attacking with his rook kind of stranded here on this h4 square. We have h6, she stops g5, but now just queen to c2, putting more pressure on that f5 pawn, but now queen to e7. Now she's threatening all sorts of nasty discoveries once the knight moves, but also this queen to c5 check could have very strong repercussions. So g captures on f5, she goes queen to c5 with check, king to h1, and now e captures on f5, asking what do you play here. He goes for queen captures on f5, and now we have rook to e8. Now, the reason is, of course, you are probably wondering why not just capture the bishop, because if you capture the bishop, it's a forced draw. Queen to e6 with check, and you cannot avoid a draw. Queen f5 check, and now if you repeat, we just go queen to e6 with check, and if you go king to h8, you can even win with rook captures on h6 check, captures, now the knight falls, and now you just get checkmated. Queen f7 check, king h8, knight to g6 will be checkmate. So after queen captures on f5, she goes rook to e8. Now, there is no more queen to e6 check, and now the bishop is just hanging, also the knight is hanging. So is there anything way you can do here to save the game? Well, that is exactly what we are going to do here in the pause the video moment. Feel free to pause the video while I give you a couple of seconds and try to find the only move that saves the game for Wei Yi while I give you a couple of seconds. I said that twice, I know. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this incredible move. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is rook to g4. That's how you save the game. And the reason for that is if, of course, the rook is captured, then you now again have access to this f7 square, queen to f7 check, king to h7. If you go king to h7, you're even going to lose the game. And if you go king to h8, it's even worse. If you go king to h8, we just deliver one check. And now we've opened up this diagonal, so it doesn't matter. This will just be checkmate. So you can't go here and allow a check. You have to play king to h7. But even here, just queen to g6 check, king to g8, and now queen captures on e8 check. That will be game over. So you can't really do something like this. So after rook to g4, it would be, not the greatest of ideas to capture this rook. The only way to survive this now with black is to go rook e captures on e5, and after bishop captures on e5, now you're going to play knight captures on g4. Queen to e6 with check, and okay, now it's a repetition. King h7, f captures on g4, and there is no way for black to win anything. It's a draw. There's still moves to play, but not all that much. For example, if you want to bring the knight into the game, you can even give up the bishop. Bishop captures on g7, king captures, and now rook to f1, and you will have sufficient pressure to force a perpetual here with moves like queen to f6 if the knight moves, or there are many ideas. You have to be very careful not to get checkmated here. So that's the only move to actually save the game for Wei Yi. However, after rook to e8, he played rook to g1, which seems like a much better idea because the g pawn is now pinned. You can play queen captures on f6, you can play rook captures on h6, but he missed one very important thing, is that it just doesn't work. And she spots it. She plays rook d captures on e5, grabs that knight, bishop captures on e5, rook captures on e5, and now unfortunately you can't play queen captures on f6. Yes, the g pawn is pinned, but it's pinned by the rook, so we can simply eliminate the rook. Queen captures on g1 just wins the game. If king captures, now we pick up the queen, we're up a full knight. Of course, it's a completely winning endgame. So there's no good move for Wei Yi. He moves the queen back. We have rook to d5, queen to e2, and now rook to e5, not allowing the queen to go to e6, queen to d2, and now just queen e3 offering a queen trade. You kind of have to accept this because otherwise queen captures on f3 will come. So queen captures, rook captures, and now we have this endgame where she has two knights against a rook, and it is of course completely winning, but you still have to play it properly. b4 was played, we have a captures on b4, and now a5, where he starts advancing his passed a pawn. This is the only chance he has of saving the game. We have knight b back to d5, and now rook to a1, of course putting the rook behind the passed pawn. Pawn to c5, now her pawns are also marching forward, rook to c4 going after the pawn, and now knight to d7 defending. We have rook to e4 offering a rook trade, but even if a rook trade occurs here, she still has a winning position, but she says no need to do that. Rook captures on f3, rook to e6, and now pawn to b3. She also has passed pawns, so she will start pushing them forward. Pawn to a6, we have rook to f8, now you have to guard the queening square, and rook to c6 going after the c pawns. We have knight to c3, now guarding the queening square, and rook captures on c7. Pawn to b2 attacks the rook. We have rook to g1, and now just b1 queen. So you have to give up the rook. Rook captures, knight captures, and the rook captures on d7. But now, of course, rook to a8. We have pawn to a7, and now knight to a3. We have rook to b7, stopping knight to b5. You have to keep this pawn if you want to keep your chances alive. King to h7. We have king to g2, and here c4. And it was in this position on move 51 that Wei Yi resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here, because it's actually quite simple. Once the king starts approaching the passed pawn, pawn to c3, king e2, c2, and king to d2, stopping promotion, the pawn is protected. So it's merely a matter of one check, or rather a couple of checks. Rook to d1 check, king b2, and now we bring a queen into the game, and the white king gets checkmated very soon. Queen to a1 check, king b3, rook to b1 with check, king to a4, and let's say knight to c4 will be a nice checkmate. So of course he knows this. After c4 he resigns the game, and another brilliant win for Zhu Wenjun in second day of this wonderful FTX Road to Miami preliminaries tournament. So she had a pretty bad day. She lost the first 3 games, and then got one win against Temur Rajabov. But in the second day, as you can see, here are all of the games that she played. So she started with 3 losses, but then out of the next 5 games, she defeated 4 incredibly strong grandmasters, including 2 of the candidates from the candidates tournament. So in a row, she defeated Temur Rajabov and Richard Rapport, then lost Radoslav Wojtaszek, and then she defeated Sam Shankland and Wei Yi in the 8th game. So definitely an incredible achievement for her. And if you guys are interested in the standings, you can see that she is currently number 7 out of the very strong 16 grandmasters. And if she can remain in the lower half, then she will qualify for the main event. But currently, these are the the top players. The only player in first place, Samuel Sevian, followed by Arjun Nergeisi. With 16 points, we have Jeffrey Shiong and Yang Shistov Duda. With 13 points, Mamedyarov and Danish Giri. With 12 points, we have Wenjun, Richard Rapport, and Wei Yi. With 10 points, Levon Aronyan and Hans Moke Niemann, Aryan Tari, and Radoslav Wojtaszek with 7 points. With 5 points, Linear Dominguez, Shanklin with 3, and Temur Rajabov with 0 points. But also he withdrew from the tournament because he did not have the greatest day one, and then in day two he just started with a loss against Anish Giri in a position where he should have been playing for a win, and it seems that he just collapsed and decided that it would be better if he just withdraws from the tournament. So yeah, that's the game and a little bit of extra info about the everything. So hope you guys enjoyed that as well. We'll see how Wenjun does in the third day, and will she be able to qualify for the main event? That would be quite a success for her. I would like to thank Steven Abrams, Nagarjuna Ponugoti, David Bacon, Ravishing Reptiles YouTube, and Gregory Piateski for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this wonderful event until it finishes. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And again, special congratulations to everyone who spotted that rook to g4 move. That was not an easy one to find here after this rook to rook to g4. Only move that saves the game. Awesome stuff. See you soon.